Hi, I'm Emily,
Hi, I'm Kayla.
Hi, I'm Ashley.
and we decided to do our project on vaping, social relationships, and the slippery slope of addiction. Um, so, real quickly, before we get started, we just want to talk briefly about why we chose this topic as school counselors. In being that we're all in our internship right now, I know at my school we're having a massive problem with kids bringing vapes in, starting fights over them. Um, of course, they're using it to bring in marijuana into the school, and it's just become a massive problem where groups of kids at a time are getting um, kicked out for periods of time because of them all sharing this one um, e-cigarette and then getting each other in trouble. What about you, Kayla?
So at my school, this project is one that I really want to look into more because at two of the schools that I'm at, both my middle school placement and my high school placement, we've been seeing a lot of students engaging with these. At the middle school level, um, it's, hardly a month will go by without us finding students in the bathroom vaping, and that will typically result in disciplinary action against anything from like 4 to even 10 students at a time. And that the high school, we're starting to see students that literally cannot go the day without this kind of thing. We're seeing students that are starting to show behavioral and affective differences, and it's just something that's really affecting every single student in the building, whether they themselves are vaping or they have a friend or someone who's a peer around them who is also vaping. So because it just affects so many students in the environments that I see, I wanted to do a little more research about it. How about you, Ashley?
Um, I haven't had much experience with vaping other than I have some young family members and um, they've mentioned that their friends vape. I just recently went to the high school. So in elementary, we only had one case where a girl had a vape. Um, she claimed it wasn't hers. It was between her and another female. But other than that, we haven't really had too many cases of vaping. But I know it was very popular in middle school and high school because um, just of the age group. I know from experience that it's extremely popular. So I know I'm going to be seeing a bunch of that here shortly, actually, in the upcoming weeks. So this this pertains definitely.
Okay, so we wanted to just offer some basic statistics before we really talk much more. Um, so the National Youth Tobacco Survey found that in 2020, nearly 20% of high school students was involved in vaping, and about 5% of middle school students also reported using e-cigarettes on a regular basis. Now, this breaks down to the e-cigarettes that they used on 20 or more of the past 30 days. About 40% of the high school students engaged in that behavior, and 20% of the middle school students were using it. And when it goes down to daily use, about 23% of high school students were using it every single day of this survey, and then about 10% of the middle school users used it daily. So that's a significant amount, and they're using it, well, not every day, but at least every other day that both high school students and middle school students are doing this. Obviously, it's a lot worse in high school, but we're seeing this behavior quite a lot in middle school. Now, it's important to note as well, just kind of going forward with the rest of our conversation here, that 82.9% of them used flavored e-cigarettes. A majority of them did. Then let's talk about the risk factors real briefly, okay? So it's found that students that vape have a really high risk for smoking. If they start by ninth grade vaping, they are smoking cigars and cigarettes within the next year. And high school students who use cigarettes in the last month were about 7 times more likely to start smoking regularly within 6 months. So this is a very quick process. Interestingly enough, students who smoked regular cigarettes were no more likely to use e-cigarettes. So it's purely e-cigarettes to tobacco, not tobacco to e-cigarettes. Now, just real briefly, what is a vape if you're not familiar? Vapes are defined as battery operated devices that are used to inhale an aerosol, which usually contains nicotine, flavorings, and other chemicals. They often have fillable tanks depending on the form that they take. And a few other names for these are e-hookahs, hookah pens, Joules, which are very popular, vape pens, and of course mods, which are like the ones they build, and they can actually be very expensive. Of course, e-cigarettes and e-vaporizers. And if you look at the center of the screen there, the poster, there's a couple visuals for them. So, okay, thank you. Kayla?
Sure. So I'm going to take over talking a little bit about vape culture and the social peer pressure that many adolescents face in regard to vaping. So vape culture has really emerged as its own subculture, as initially an alternative to the regular cigarettes, but it has emerged into something more that a lot of students are using it to as a form of identity and self-expression. It's really heavily promoted through social media, celebrities, and there are even now entire events and conventions dedicated specifically to vaping as both a social activity and an art form. If you do a quick search around on Google, you'll quickly find that, you know, these conventions are growing in popularity. There are even contests for something called cloud chasing. It's essentially who can blow the biggest plume of vape. So it has become a competitive event. So there really is a whole culture around this, and it does affect everyone. You can see in the middle, there's an illustration about some female celebrities that are using vapes. So it's something that is very present in the media today. So in addition to the ones that I already mentioned, young people are constantly bombarded with vapes and exposed to them through movies, television, advertisement stores, and the internet. Now, we do see a few advertisements against vapes as well, but it simply does not invade their space nearly as often as positive advertising for these things. So generally, what is drawing the adolescents in? Of course, like I said, they are being bombarded with it through social media, but what is it that really makes it so appealing to them? As Emily mentioned, most vape users are using vapes that are flavored, and this isn't some kind of a one-size-fits-all thing. As of 2019, there were over 7,000 different flavors for vape juices, and that number has almost certainly grown since then. So really any kind of flavor you could possibly think of, whether it's something that appeals to an older demographic or even a very young one, you can find a flavor that appeals. And that's something that we're really seeing with the adolescents, are very almost childish flavors, everything from cereals to candies to any kind of sweet treat. There is a vape flavor for it.
And just to add to that real briefly, the most common flavors, popular ones, are fruits, and which are followed by chocolates. So fruits and chocolate are the two most popular.
Absolutely. So we're seeing a lot that like appeal to a broad demographic. Additionally, students generally perceive it as a healthier alternative to smoking. Originally, when e-cigarettes and vapes first came out, they were promoted almost as purely like a vapor type substance. So it was promoted as if it were non-addictive, as if there were nothing in it. And now what we're seeing is that some of these vapes have more chemicals in it and are more addictive and worse for you than a cigarette. So there's this very false perception around them that they're healthier. And the reality is a lot of times they're much, much worse. In addition, some of the added chemicals have the effect of not irritating your lungs like a cigarette would. So a lot of young people are getting addicted much, much faster because you're almost skipping over that phase where you kind of have to push through the sensation in order to get hooked. Students are also heavily influenced by their peers and will often vape to be perceived as cool. If you look back at those numbers, we see a jump from middle school to high school, and a lot of times that has to do with the influence of older students or even the students around them that have this perception of being cool, hip, or popular as a result of vaping. Again, vaping is really popular, more so with teens and young adults than it would be for any other demographic. So it really is hitting our adolescents more than any other age group. With one study citing that 1 in 4 high school seniors has vaped at least once. On a more individualistic basis, one high school student reported that learning and getting education on the risks associated with vaping didn't actually dissuade himself or his friends, because there's somewhat of a disassociation between the reality of vapes and what your perception of it is, in that even when students learn about some of the risks, once they're already hooked on it, they have the idea that those bad things will not happen to them until, of course, those things are already happening. One student is quoted saying, "It has infiltrated every social clique. Every type of person knows someone, or maybe they are that person who is vaping." So this isn't something that's just associated with one kind of popular. The quote went on to say, it's not the nerds, it's not the jocks, it's not even students that would be quote unquote stoners. It's not any specific group or any specific type of person. Everyone is affected by vaping, and it has infiltrated every sphere of student social groups.
Ashley?
Oh, my apologies. I was waiting for Kayla to pass it over to me. So the effects of vaping, going off of what Kayla had mentioned regarding chemicals and etc. There are liquid particles that are in the vape flavors. Although that it is seen as a safer alternative to smoking, it holds the same health risks. So electronic cigarettes and vapes have been found to have volatile organic compounds and particulate matter, which those both consist of aerosols and heavy metals, radicals, carcinogenics, etc. The levels are lower than what you may find in a cigarette. However, the existence of these organic compounds, or VOCs as we call it, and the particulate matter, or PMs, they are still responsible for the same medical conditions caused by cigarette smoking. So for example, electronic cigarettes can cause asthma, heart disease, lung cancer, and increases the risk of heart attacks if you're exposed to it on a daily basis. The components of electronic cigarettes and vapes are also toxic to humans, such as the mechanics that make up the vapes and electronic cigarettes. There are heating coils used, and those heating coils obviously are made of metal, and they release heavy metals through the vapor whenever they heat up, such as nickel and chromium, which have been shown to be carcinogenics. They're also associated with chronic bronchitis, reduced lung function, and lung cancer. And according to the International Agency for Research on Cancer, nickel and chromium were both classified as carcinogenics. So it does not come without risk to use electronic cigarettes or vapes, just because they seem as a safer alternative method to inhaling cigarette smoke. I kind of think it goes without saying that anything you inhale inside of your body is probably not, without fault of some kind. So that's a large effect and misunderstanding when it comes to vaping and electronic cigarettes being safer than regular cigarettes.
All right, so moving over to some of the interventions, we kind of split the interventions into two pieces. First, interventions intended once a student or adolescent is already hooked on vaping, and then a few for preventative measures. So for the ones for students who are already hooked on vaping, the first three, first being motivational interviewing, just to kind of talk them through it, see what they actually want, and kind of break them out of that mindless cycle of vaping day after day with no end in sight, and almost as a habit. So to really make them think and process about what they're doing and whether or not it's in line with what they want. CBT as well, for much the same reason, to try and break that cycle of habit. And then mindfulness-based smoking cessation treatments. So these are treatments that have also been used for people who have been addicted to cigarettes. This really, again, breaks that cycle of habit, breaks into the without thinking process, and makes you kind of think about what you're doing. It involves some education. And this, none of these are necessarily intended to be broken off cold turkey. All of these are kind of to work their way towards a solution by slowly infiltrating and breaking through that cycle of addiction.
Yeah, kind of just going off of what Kayla was saying, there was a lot of different things that, as you can see, it talks about behavioral therapies, and which very much go hand in hand with that of the mindfulness, because many of the articles that I read talked a lot about like having kids journal, like why are they vaping, what's causing them, why do they want it, what can they do instead, all those kinds of things to consider, kind of almost similar to like mindful eating techniques, very similar with vaping. Now, a lot of pharmacology therapies as well, like maybe something taking medicine for anxiety if they need it, if that's why they're vaping. You know, you can figure that out once the source is understood. And also, they're finding a lot of success with using NRT patches, which are just like the nicotine blocking patches, and they're finding which ones are a bit better for that. And they're finding if they like use them in a certain order, it helps to curb those. But as they're not regular cigarettes, they have to do them in a very specific way. So, and you can see it says a long-acting NRT patch for baseline nicotine delivery, so that they have to use the basic one, and then they have to use a short-acting one as well to just block the vaping. So it's just a different thing. And also just talking about prevention, which Kayla wanted to talk about. So go ahead.
Sure. So like I said, those previous interventions were specific to once a student is already hooked on vaping, but as likely is obvious, when someone is addicted, it is an uphill battle from there. So honestly, if we really want to see the numbers go down among students and adolescents, prevention is key and will be the most effective thing towards knocking back those numbers. A big piece of this is education. Once a student is already hooked, they don't really care, or if they do care, they think it will not happen to them even once they learn some of the risks. So teaching students about those risks up front and kind of breaking it off as not a cool thing, showing them the reality with all of its ugly pieces of what vaping can lead to. It's important to inform students of those things. Additionally, it's a great resource to involve the school nurse for advocacy, prevention, education, and just providing resources to students. As counselors, we can certainly inform them of things, but no one's really going to be able to break down the biology of what happens quite like a school nurse or someone within the medical profession. So it's important to use the resources within the building to break down that stigma for students who are around other students. And like I said, it's just really important as well to tackle some of those other reasons, like Emily had mentioned, the why behind what students are vaping. Of course, that one is going to be specific to each individual student, but school counselors really breaking into the mentality of the community that you're in, looking at trends of addiction, looking at trends of social issues, mental health issues to see where we can provide the best support to our students. It really is like a great solution to just about everything, and vaping is no different. The more we know about our communities and the more we can tackle those issues, the more we're going to be able to see those kinds of numbers decrease. All right, so at the bottom are all of our references. If anyone is interested in learning any more, there are links included to all of the articles that we cited within our presentation. We hope you all enjoyed that, and thanks very much for listening.
Thank you so much.